I thought I knew my life. I thought I knew my husband. I thought I knew my best friend. I was wrong about everything. The day I drove my 11-year-old son to visit my best friend Tasha, the woman I'd trusted since childhood, I had no idea I was about to witness the moment that would split my entire world in two. But when I turned onto her street and saw my husband's truck parked in her driveway, the truck that was supposed to be across town at a client meeting, every instinct in my body screamed that something was terribly, terribly wrong. I told my son to stay in the car. I walked to her window. And through that glass, I heard words that didn't just break my heart. They revealed a conspiracy so calculated, so cruel, that it made my blood run cold. "She's got no fire left," my husband said, his arm wrapped around my best friend's waist. "You're the real thing." They laughed. They laughed at me. The woman who'd sung at their weddings, who'd helped build their dreams, who'd trusted them with everything. But here's what they didn't know: I wasn't just a woman scorned. I was a woman who was about to become their worst nightmare. What I discovered in the weeks that followed wasn't just an affair. It was an 18-month con that involved forged signatures, stolen money, and a web of lies so deep it reached into my family, my finances, and my very identity. And when I was done, they didn't just lose each other, they lost everything. This is the story of how I took back my life and made sure they paid for every single lie. My name is Maya Jackson. I'm 36 years old, a social worker here in Atlanta, and for the last 10 years, I thought I had built a life worth being proud of. I had a husband I loved, a beautiful son, and a career helping families in the community where I grew up. But on that warm afternoon in late January, as I drove through the familiar streets of Atlanta's South Side with my 11-year-old son Jaden in the back seat, I had no idea that everything I believed about my life was about to come crashing down. The radio played softly as I turned onto Martin Luther King Jr., drive gospel music, filling the car with that Sunday morning feeling even though it was a Thursday. Jaden hummed along in the back, his fingers flying across his tablet, and I smiled at him in the rearview mirror. This was my neighborhood, the place where I'd grown up, where my grandmother had raised me in that little house on Auburn Avenue after my mother left when I was 7. Every corner held a memory. There was the corner store where Tasha and I used to buy penny candy after school, the park where we'd practiced our double Dutch routines until the streetlights came on, the church where I'd first sung solo at 14, my voice cracking with nerves until my grandmother nodded at me from the front pew and I found my courage. I'd worked hard to give back to this community. Just last week, I'd gotten the news that made me want to dance in the street. My application for a community development grant had been approved. $150,000 to fund after-school programs, job training, and family counseling services. I'd spent 6 months on that application, working late into the night after Jaden went to bed, believing that this money could change lives. Our lives. All of our lives. I was heading to share the news with Tasha, my best friend since the 3rd grade. Tasha Green, who now owned Luxe Beauty Salon on the corner of Boulevard and Freedom Parkway. We'd dreamed together as little girls about what we'd become when we grew up. She'd wanted to do hair and make women feel beautiful. I'd wanted to help people find their way out of hard times. We'd both made it in our own ways, and I was so proud of her, so proud of us. My marriage to Darius had been rough lately, I couldn't deny that. He'd been distant for months, always stressed about work, always on his phone, always finding reasons to stay late at job sites or meet with clients on weekends. We'd been together for 12 years, married for 10, and somewhere along the way, we'd stopped really seeing each other. He said I was always working, always putting everyone else first. I said he'd stopped trying, stopped showing up. But I loved him. I'd made vows, and I meant them. 10 years of marriage was worth fighting for, wasn't it? I kept telling myself we just needed to reconnect to remember why we'd fallen in love in the first place. I turned onto Tasha's street, already planning what I'd say. I'd probably cry when I told her about the grant. She'd scream and hug me, and we'd open a bottle of wine, even though it was only 3 in the afternoon, and everything would feel right with the world again. But then I saw it. Darius's truck. His Ford F-150 with Jackson & Sons Construction emblazoned across the side in bold letters sat right there in Tasha's driveway like it belonged there. like it had been there before. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. There had to be an explanation. Maybe he was doing some repair work for her. Maybe the salon needed something fixed. But even as I tried to convince myself, my stomach dropped, that sick feeling you get when your body knows the truth before your mind is ready to accept it. I pulled to the curb, 2 houses down, my heart hammering against my ribs. Darius had told me this morning he had a client meeting across town, way up in Buckhead. He'd kissed my forehead barely. Just a brush of his lips grabbed his travel mug and headed out the door before I'd even finished making Jaden's breakfast. Why was his truck here? Why was he at Tasha's house in the middle of a Thursday afternoon? Through the front window, I could see movement, shadows passing too close together, and then I heard it drifting out through the slightly open window music. Gospel music. The kind that fills up a church on Sunday morning and makes you feel like everything's going to be all right. But this wasn't just any gospel song. This was Blessed Assurance. The song that had played when Darius and I cut our wedding cake 10 years ago. The song we'd chosen together because it meant something to us, because we'd believed we were blessed, that our love was an assurance we could count on. Hearing it now, coming from inside Tasha's house with my husband's truck in the driveway, felt like a knife sliding between my ribs. I sat there frozen, unable to move, unable to think, unable to do anything but stare at that house where I'd spent 1,000 afternoons, where I'd cried over breakups and celebrated promotions and planned my wedding shower. Through the window, I saw more movement, heard laughter, Darius's deep laugh and Tasha's high-pitched giggle, the one she used when she was flirting. "Mama!" Jaden's voice snapped me back to reality. I looked at him in the rearview mirror. His brown eyes, so much like mine, were confused, but not worried yet. He was still innocent, still living in a world where his parents loved each other, and his mother's best friend was like family. "Mama, why's Daddy's truck here?" The question hung in the air between us, and I felt something inside me split wide open. I couldn't let him see whatever was happening in that house. I couldn't let him witness the moment his mother's world fell apart. I unbuckled my seatbelt, my hands trembling so badly I could barely manage the clasp. I turned to face my son, forcing my voice to stay steady, even though everything inside me was screaming. "Baby, stay in the car, lock the doors, I'll be right back." I stepped out of the car, closing the door as quietly as I could, and heard the automatic locks click behind me as Jaden obeyed. My legs felt strange, like they belonged to someone else as I crossed the street and walked up Tasha's front lawn. The grass needed cutting. I noticed that. Isn't it strange what the mind focuses on when it's trying to protect you from something too terrible to face? The grass was too long, and there were weeds growing up through the cracks in her driveway, and I thought absently that Darius should help her with that. He was good with yard work, and then I remembered why I was here, and the thought died in my throat. The gospel music got louder as I approached the house. Blessed Assurance played on that hymn that was supposed to mean something sacred, something pure, and now it was the soundtrack to whatever nightmare I was about to witness. My nursing flats made no sound on the concrete walkway. I'd learned to move quietly in my work visiting families in crisis-entering homes where every sound could set off an argument or wake a sleeping baby. Now that skill served a purpose I'd never imagined. I pressed myself against the brick wall beside the living room window, my heart hammering so hard I was certain they'd hear it inside. The curtains were partially open, just enough of a gap for me to see in if I angled myself right. For a moment I stood there with my eyes closed, taking 3 deep breaths the way my therapist had taught me years ago when the anxiety got bad. I knew that once I looked, I couldn't unknow what I was about to see. Everything would change. The life I'd built, the marriage I'd fought for, the friendship I'd treasured since I was 8 years old, it would all transform into something else, something broken. But I had to know. I had to see. I leaned forward and looked through the gap in the curtains. They were on the couch. Tasha's cream-colored couch that I'd helped her pick out at the furniture store last summer, the one we'd spent 2 hours debating over because she couldn't decide between cream and beige. Darius sat in the corner, his work boots kicked off on the floor, his arm wrapped around Tasha's waist, with a casual possessiveness that made my chest tighten. She was curled into him, her head resting on his shoulder, her hand on his chest, and they were looking at something on her phone together, laughing. It was the comfort between them that destroyed me. This wasn't the fumbling awkwardness of a new affair. This was practiced, routine. The way Tasha's body fit against his, the way his thumb traced circles on her hip, the way they moved together like they'd done this 100 times before. He leaned down and kissed the top of her head, soft and tender, the kind of kiss you give someone when you're not trying to impress them anymore, when you've settled into loving them. My hand moved to my phone, automatically pulling it from my purse with shaking fingers. I opened the camera app and started recording through the window. 30 seconds. That's all I captured. His hand moving up to cup her face, her leaning into his palm like a cat seeking warmth, their bodies fitting together like pieces of a puzzle I'd never known existed. Then Darius spoke, and I had to strain to hear through the glass, but his voice carried clear enough to shatter whatever was left of my heart. "She's got no fire left, Tash. You're the real thing." I watched Tasha tilt her head up to look at him, her expression soft, almost pitying. "She's always been like that, baby, even back in high school. Always the good girl, the responsible one. Never knew how to just let go and live." They laughed together. Actually laughed. Like I was a joke they'd been sharing for months, maybe years. Like the woman I was, the woman I'd worked so hard to become, was something amusing, something to be mocked in private moments. The pain of watching them touch was nothing compared to hearing this. They hadn't just betrayed me. They'd erased me, rewritten who I was into someone small and cold and joyless, someone who wasn't enough, someone who'd never been enough. I stopped recording and lowered my phone. Tears streamed down my face hot and fast, but I didn't make a sound. I'd learned how to cry silently a long time ago, back when I was a little girl, and my mother left, and I didn't want my grandmother to hear me sobbing in the night because she had enough to worry about. Some skills you never forget. Inside, Darius said something else I couldn't quite catch, and Tasha's giggle pierced through the window like breaking glass. He looked so relaxed, so happy, so free. The way he used to look at me 10 years ago, before life got hard and bills piled up, and I became the woman with no fire left. I backed away from the window slowly, my body moving on instinct while my mind tried to process what I'd seen. My hand found the brick wall steadying me, and I stood there in Tasha's side yard, tears still falling, gospel music still playing. Then I heard Darius's voice one more time, clearer now, almost like he was speaking directly to me through the wall. "She'll never find out." I pressed my palm against the brick, feeling its rough surface ground me back to reality, and whispered into the empty air between us. I just did. I walked back to the car on legs that somehow still worked, even though everything inside me felt like it was collapsing. Jaden looked up from his tablet as I slid into the driver's seat, and I realized I'd been gone longer than I'd intended, long enough for him to start worrying. "Mama, you okay?" His voice was small, uncertain in a way that made my heart clench. I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My eyes were red-rimmed, my mascara smudged at the corners. I grabbed a tissue from the console and dabbed at my face, forcing my lips into something that might pass for a smile. "I'm fine, baby. Just allergies acting up. You know how they get this time of year." He nodded, accepting the lie the way children do when they want to believe their parents are invincible. I started the car and pulled away from that house, away from the sound of gospel music and laughter, away from the man I'd married and the friend I'd trusted. My hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly that my knuckles went white, and I had to consciously remind myself to loosen them to breathe, to keep the car steady on the road. Jaden went back to his tablet, and I was grateful for the silence. Grateful that he couldn't see my face fully, couldn't see the way I was barely holding myself together. The drive home took 15 minutes, though it felt like hours. Every stoplight was an eternity. Every turn brought a fresh wave of images I couldn't unsee. Darius's hand on her waist, Tasha's head on his shoulder. The easy intimacy between them, the comfort, the routine of it all. How long had this been going on? How many times had I called Tasha to talk about my marriage problems while she was sleeping with my husband? How many times had Darius kissed me goodbye in the morning and then driven straight to her? When we got home, I went through the motions of being a mother, because that's what you do. You don't get to fall apart when your child needs dinner. I made Jaden's favorite spaghetti with turkey meatballs and sat across from him at the kitchen table while he told me about his day at school, something about a science project on the solar system. And I nodded and smiled and said all the right things, even though I couldn't taste the food in my mouth, couldn't focus on his words, couldn't feel anything except this hollowness spreading through my chest. After dinner, I helped him with his math homework fractions that seemed impossibly complicated, even though I knew they were simple. My mind kept wandering, kept replaying that scene through the window, and I had to ask him to repeat the problems twice. At 8:30, I tucked him into bed, pulled his Superman comforter up to his chin, kissed his forehead, and told him I loved him. He was almost asleep before I left the room, his breathing already evening out into the peaceful rhythm of childhood. Then I was alone. Darius texted around 9 saying he'd be late, another client issue. I stared at the message for a long time at the casual lie and didn't respond. I poured myself a glass of wine, then poured it down the sink. I needed to be clear-headed. I needed to think. At 2 in the morning, I sat at our kitchen table with my laptop open and all our financial documents spread out in front of me. I don't know what made me look. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the way Tasha's house had looked too nice lately, too renovated, too polished for a salon owner who'd been complaining about slow business just 6 months ago. Maybe it was the sick feeling that if they'd lie about one thing, they'd lie about everything. I started with the easy stuff, credit card statements, and there it was on last month's Visa bill, a charge to Mountain View Luxury Cabins, $1,200 for a weekend rental. I remembered that weekend. Darius had told me he was going on a guy's fishing trip, needed to decompress. Work had been so stressful. I'd encouraged him to go, had even packed him sandwiches for the road. I clicked through to the cabin's website and found the receipt in his email. He'd never been good about logging out of his accounts on our shared computer. The confirmation showed exactly what he'd booked: a deluxe suite with king bed, fireplace, and champagne package for 2. Not a fishing cabin, a romantic getaway. My hands shook as I opened our bank account app. I went through our joint checking account transaction by transaction, scrolling back through months of history. At first, I didn't see anything unusual. Grocery store, gas station, utility bills, Jaden's school fees, normal life expenses. But then I started noticing the transfers. Small ones at first, easy to miss. $500 here, $700 there, sometimes $1,000. Always listed as transfer to savings in the notes. Except we didn't have the savings account anymore. We'd drained it last year to fix the roof. I pulled up the transfer history and traced where the money actually went. 8 months of weekly transfers, sometimes twice a week. The total made my stomach turn. $28,000, gone from our joint account, the account that held my paychecks, my grant money, everything I'd worked for. Then I saw tomorrow's scheduled transfer, queued up and ready to process at 9 in the morning. $5,000 to TG Beauty LLC, Tasha Green Beauty LLC. My money. Our money. The money I earned counseling families in crisis, helping women escape abuse, supporting children through trauma. That money had been funding my best friend's salon renovation, funding her affair with my husband, funding the life they were building together while I worked late nights and missed Jaden's soccer games and believed I was building something that mattered. I sat there in the dark kitchen, the laptop screen casting a blue glow across the scattered papers, and the truth settled over me like a weight I'd be carrying for the rest of my life. This wasn't just infidelity. This wasn't just betrayal. This was theft. I closed the laptop slowly and spoke to the empty room, my voice barely above a whisper. You didn't just cheat on me. You've been stealing from us. I didn't sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table until dawn broke through the window, my mind racing through everything I'd discovered, trying to make sense of the scope of what they'd done. When Jaden came downstairs for breakfast at 7, I had already showered, dressed, and made pancakes, moving through the routine with a strange clarity that comes after shock wears off and purpose takes its place. I dropped him at school, kissed his cheek, and told him I loved him. Then I drove straight to Mercy Gospel Church. Reverend Cole had known me since I was 14, since the day I first sang in his choir, and my voice cracked on the high note, and he told me that even broken things make beautiful sounds when offered to God. He was in his office when I arrived, reading glasses perched on his nose, studying scripture for Sunday's sermon. He looked up when I knocked, and whatever he saw in my face made him set down his Bible immediately and gesture me inside. I told him everything. The truck in the driveway, the window, the words they'd said, the money. $28,000 stolen from our family while I worked myself to exhaustion trying to build something good in this community. When I finished, he leaned back in his chair and folded his hands across his chest, his expression grave. "Sister Maya," he said slowly, "I know you're hurting. I know this feels like the end of everything. But the Lord calls us to forgiveness. He calls us to turn the other cheek, to love those who wrong us, to show grace, even when we don't feel it." He reached for his worn Bible and flipped to a passage he probably knew by heart. Colossians 3:13, "Bear with each other and forgive one another if any of you has a grievance against someone. Forgive as the Lord forgave you." I sat there listening, nodding respectfully the way I'd been taught to do when elders spoke, but something inside me was burning. Not with rage, though, that was there too. With clarity, with purpose, with the knowledge that faith doesn't mean letting people destroy you while you smile and pray for them. "Reverend," I said quietly, "I appreciate your guidance. I do. But forgiveness doesn't mean I have to let them keep stealing from my son's future. Turning the other cheek doesn't mean I stand still while they drain everything I've worked for. Grace is important, but so is justice." His eyes met mine, and I saw something flicker there. Understanding, maybe. Or respect. He nodded slowly. "You do what you need to do, sister. God gave you strength for a reason." From the church, I drove across town to the law office of Angela Davis. Angela and I had gone to college together, had been in the same sorority, had stayed friends even after she went to law school, and I went into social work. 5 years ago, her husband had cleaned out their bank accounts and disappeared with his secretary. Angela had rebuilt herself from nothing, put herself through night school to finish her law degree, and now she specialized in family law with a particular focus on financial abuse in marriages. When I walked into her office and she saw my face, she poured us both coffee without asking and shut the door. I spread the bank statements across her desk, showed her the transfers, the cabin receipt, everything I'd found. She studied them with the careful attention of someone who'd seen this story before, her jaw tightening as she added up the numbers. 28,000 over 8 months, she said. "This is systematic. This is planned." She looked up at me. "Do you have access to any other accounts, business accounts, loans?" I shook my head, but then I remembered something. "Wait. Last year, Tasha mentioned she was expanding the salon. She said something about a business loan, but I didn't pay much attention. I was dealing with my grant application and Jaden's school stuff." Angela's fingers flew across her keyboard. "Give me her business name." "TG Beauty LLC." 10 minutes later, Angela turned her computer screen toward me, and I felt the floor drop out from under me again. There on the screen was a small business loan application for $75,000 approved 6 months ago. The collateral listed was property owned by Maya and Darius Jackson, and at the bottom of the document was my signature. Except it wasn't my signature. "I never signed this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "Angela, I've never seen this document before in my life." She leaned forward, her eyes sharp and focused. "Then someone forged your signature. And that Maya is federal fraud. This isn't just an affair anymore. This is conspiracy to commit financial crimes." She zoomed in on the signature line, and that's when I saw it. A small circular stamp in blue ink next to where my name had been forged. A notary public seal with a number and a date. The date was 6 months ago, August 15th. My mind raced back. August 15th. That was the night of the community gala, the fundraiser where I'd networked with donors for my grant application. I'd worn my navy dress, the one I saved for special occasions. I'd given a speech about the importance of community investment. I'd shaken hands with dozens of people. "That was the night of the gala," I told Angela. "I was there for hours talking to people, taking photos. Anyone could have had access to my purse, my information." Angela's expression grew darker. "Someone notarized a forged signature. That's a crime in itself. I need 2 weeks to trace this notary stamp number, find out who authorized this document." She looked at me directly, her voice steady and serious. "Maya, this is bigger than your husband cheating with your best friend. This is organized, this is calculated, this is conspiracy." My hands were shaking again, but this time it wasn't from pain. It was from understanding. They hadn't just betrayed me in a moment of weakness or passion. They'd planned this. They'd used me. Angela reached across her desk and gripped my hand. "We're going to find out exactly what they did and who helped them do it." Then she said the words that changed everything. "Maya, there's a third person involved. Someone who had access to you that night." For the next month, I became someone I'd never been before. I woke up next to Darius every morning and kissed him goodbye. I answered Tasha's texts about getting together soon. I went to work, came home, made dinner, helped Jaden with homework, and smiled through it all while Angela worked behind the scenes tracing paper trails and building a case. The performance was exhausting but necessary. They couldn't know that I knew. Not yet. When Darius announced he wanted to do something special for our 10th anniversary, I almost laughed at the audacity. Our actual anniversary had passed 3 weeks ago without so much as a card from him, but apparently guilt has a way of making men suddenly romantic. He said he wanted to cook dinner at home, make it intimate, just family. Then he mentioned inviting Tasha. "She's been such a good friend to us both," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Feels right to have her celebrate with us." I agreed with a warmth I didn't feel. "That's a wonderful idea, baby. Tasha's like family." The night of the dinner, I spent 2 hours getting ready. I chose a red dress I'd bought years ago, but never had the confidence to wear the kind that hugged every curve and made a statement. I did my makeup carefully, my hands steady now, my purpose clear. When I looked in the mirror, I saw a woman I barely recognized, stronger, harder, more dangerous than the Maya who'd driven to Tasha's house a month ago. Darius's eyes widened when I came downstairs. "Wow, you look amazing." "Thank you," I said, and kissed his cheek, tasting the lie on my lips. Tasha arrived at 7, carrying a bottle of wine and wearing a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. She hugged me at the door, and I hugged her back, feeling her stiffen slightly in my arms. She knew something was different. She just couldn't figure out what. Dinner was steak and a roasted vegetables, Darius's specialty, and we sat around our dining room table like we had dozens of times before. But tonight the air felt different, charged with something electric and dangerous. I watched them try not to look at each other, watched the careful distance they maintained, the way Tasha's laugh came out too loud, and Darius kept refilling his wine glass. When dessert was served, I stood and raised my glass. "I want to make a toast," I said, my voice clear and strong, "to 10 years of marriage, to friendship that's lasted even longer, to love that survives every lie, every betrayal, every test." I looked directly at both of them. To truth, no matter how painful, to getting exactly what we deserve. I drank. They drank. Darius's hand trembled slightly as he set down his glass. Tasha's smile had frozen on her face. "I have something for you, Tasha," I said, reaching under my chair for a small wrapped box. "A thank you gift. For being such a good friend all these years." She took it reluctantly, her fingers fumbling with the ribbon. When she opened it, I watched the color drain from her face. Inside was a photograph I dug out of an old album taken 15 years ago at my high school graduation. The 3 of us arms around each other, laughing at something long forgotten. We looked so young, so innocent, so certain that we'd be friends forever. I'd written a note on the back in careful script. "Some memories don't age well." Tasha started coughing, choking on the sip of wine she'd just taken. Darius patted her back, then saw the photo still clutched in her hand. His face went pale. He looked at me, and for the first time since this started, I saw real fear in his eyes. "Maya, what?" My phone buzzed in my lap. A text from Angela. 3 words in all caps. "Found the notary. Call me now." I stood smoothly, setting my napkin on the table. "Excuse me for just a moment. I need to take this call." In the bathroom, I dialed Angela with shaking hands, my composed mask finally cracking now that I was alone. "It's Lisa Green," Angela said without preamble. "Tasha's cousin. She's a notary public, and she was working the coat check at the gala that night. Maya, she had access to your purse, your ID, everything she needed. This wasn't just Darius and Tasha. This was planned with family involvement. This was a conspiracy. I leaned against the bathroom sink, staring at my reflection. Lisa. I'd known her since she was a teenager, had watched her graduate from community college. She'd hugged me at the gala, complimented my dress, taken my coat. And while I was inside networking and dreaming about helping my community, she was stealing my identity to help her cousin and my husband rob me blind. "How long do we have before we can move?" I asked Angela. 2 more weeks. I want everything airtight. But Maya, we've got them, all 3 of them. I hung up and stared at myself for a long moment. Then I fixed my lipstick, straightened my dress, and walked back to the dining room where Darius and Tasha sat in uncomfortable silence, the photographs still on the table between them like an accusation. I slid into my seat and smiled, bright and beautiful and sharp as a knife. "Now then," I said, my voice honey-sweet, "let's have dessert." But my eyes, when they met theirs, promised something else entirely, promised that the reckoning was coming and it would be worse than anything they could imagine. The next morning, Angela and I walked into the Atlanta Police Department downtown precinct, and I filed a formal report: identity theft, fraud, forgery. The officer taking my statement looked sympathetic but weary, like he'd heard versions of this story 1,000 times before. But when I showed him the loan documents, the forged signature, the notary stamp, his expression changed. He made a phone call, and within an hour, I was sitting across from FBI agent Marcus Williams, a man in his late 40s with salt and pepper hair and eyes that missed nothing. "Mrs. Jackson," he said, spreading my documents across the conference table, "this is federal fraud, wire fraud, identity theft conspiracy. If what you're telling me is true, we're looking at multiple felonies." He looked up at me. "I'm going to need 6 weeks, maybe 2 months to build this case properly. We'll need to subpoena phone records, email accounts, bank transactions. We'll need to trace every dollar. Can you be patient?" I nodded, though patience felt impossible when I was still sleeping in the same house as the man who'd orchestrated my destruction. "How much can you find?" "Everything," Agent Williams said. "People think they can delete texts and emails, but nothing really disappears. Cloud backups, phone company servers, internet search histories, it all leaves a trail." And so began the longest 2 months of my life. I went to work every day counseling families through crisis while living through my own. I came home and made dinner while Darius complained about difficult clients. I smiled at Tasha's texts, asking when we could do brunch. I tucked Jaden into bed every night and prayed he wouldn't remember these months, wouldn't sense the war happening in the walls around him. Angela and I met twice a week in her office, going through evidence as Agent Williams's team uncovered it. Bank statements that showed the pattern of theft started even earlier than I'd thought. Emails between Darius and Tasha that made my stomach turn. Deleted text messages recovered from backup servers that revealed the careful planning of every lie. Then, on a gray February afternoon, 6 weeks after I'd filed the report, Agent Williams called us into the FBI field office. The conference room table was covered with printed documents. Laptops open a timeline mapped across a whiteboard that took up an entire wall. "Sit down, Mrs. Jackson," he said, and something in his voice made my heart drop. He pulled up an email on his laptop and turned the screen toward me. The subject line read, "Maya's grant approved $150K. The date stamp was 18 months ago. A full year and a half before I'd seen Darius's truck in Tasha's driveway. "This is from Darius Jackson to Tasha Green," Agent Williams said. "Sent the day your community development grant was approved, 4 hours after you would have received the notification." I stared at the screen, at my husband's email address, at words that rewrote everything I thought I knew about my life. Maya got the grant, $150K. "This is it, baby. This is our seed money." Tasha's response came 30 minutes later. "Finally, I've been waiting for this. When do we move on her? How long until we can access it?" Darius's reply, "Slow and steady. We can't spook her. I'll start small transfers, build the business loan using her credit. By this time next year, we'll have everything we need." Agent Williams pulled up more emails one after another, a digital paper trail of conspiracy. They discussed how to keep me distracted, how to make me feel guilty for working too much so I wouldn't notice the missing money. They planned the affair itself, like a military operation, deciding when to start showing affection publicly so it would look like it developed naturally rather than being orchestrated from the beginning. We found browser history on Mr. Jackson's laptop. Agent Williams continued pulling up another document. 18 months ago, he searched for how to hide assets from spouse, transferring money without detection. Average time for fraud discovery. He researched this, Mrs. Jackson. He studied how to steal from you. Angela reached for my hand as Agent Williams showed me the timeline they'd constructed on the whiteboard. Every email, every search, every bank transfer, color-coded and dated. The affair I'd witnessed through Tasha's window wasn't the beginning. It was the middle of a long con that had started the day I got the phone call about my grant, the day I'd called Darius crying with joy, believing he'd be happy for me. Instead, he'd seen an opportunity. They both had. I thought about the past 18 months, the night Darius suggested I apply for the grant, saying I deserved recognition for my work. How supportive he'd been during the application process, bringing me coffee while I wrote late into the night. How Tasha had thrown me a celebration dinner when it was approved, toasting to my success. I thought they loved me. I thought they were proud of me, but every smile had been a lie, every hug had been manipulation. Every "I love you," Darius had whispered in the dark, had been part of the plan to drain me dry. They hadn't fallen into weakness or temptation. They'd targeted me, hunted me, chosen me as their victim the moment they realized I had something worth taking. The room felt like it was spinning. Angela's hand tightened on mine, anchoring me, but I couldn't stop the tears that finally came. Not tears of sadness anymore. Tears of rage, of violation so deep it felt like they'd reached inside me and stolen not just my money, but my sense of reality itself. "Mrs. Jackson," Agent Williams said gently, "we have enough evidence now. We can move whenever you're ready." I looked at the timeline on that whiteboard at 18 months of calculated cruelty, and something inside me broke open. Or maybe it finally crystallized into something harder than diamond. I turned to Angela, and my voice came out raw and broken. They didn't betray me in a moment of weakness. They hunted me. Angela drove me home that day from the FBI office, and I don't remember much about the ride except staring out the window at familiar streets that felt foreign now, like I was seeing them through different eyes. That night, I lay awake next to Darius while he slept peacefully, snoring softly, completely unaware that his entire world was about to collapse. I wanted to shake him awake and scream. I wanted to demand answers. But more than that, I wanted justice. And justice required patience. The following Sunday, I did something I hadn't done in over 3 years. I went to church early before the main service and walked into the choir room where rehearsal was already underway. The voices stopped when I entered, and every face turned toward me. Sister Margaret, who'd been the choir director since I was a teenager, set down her sheet music and walked over to me with tears in her eyes. "Maya Jackson," she said, pulling me into a hug that smelled like cocoa butter and mint. "Baby girl, where have you been?" "Lost," I said honestly, "but I'm trying to find my way back." She held me at arm's length, studying my face, and whatever she saw there made her nod slowly. "We've got a new song for Easter service. Something about reclaiming what was stolen, about standing up strong after being knocked down. It needs a solo." She squeezed my hands. "It needs your voice." My throat tightened. "Sister Margaret, I haven't sung in years. I don't know if I still can." Only one way to find out. The song was called "Take Back What's Mine," and the words were written for someone like me, someone who'd been diminished and dismissed, and was finally ready to rise again. When the music started and Sister Margaret nodded at me, I opened my mouth, and at first nothing came out but a crack, a break, emotion choking off the sound. I closed my eyes and thought about everything they'd taken from me, my money, my trust, my sense of self. 18 months of my life lived in a lie, but they hadn't taken my voice. That was still mine. I tried again, and this time the note came out pure and strong, building like a wave that had been held back too long. The words poured out of me, not just singing, but releasing, not just performing, but reclaiming. My voice soared through that choir room, filling every corner with sound that was pain and power mixed together. And when I hit the final note and held it until my lungs burned, the silence that followed felt holy. Then the choir erupted in applause. Sister Margaret was crying. The other singers were on their feet. And through the door, I saw Reverend Cole standing there, his hand over his heart, nodding at me with something that looked like pride. After rehearsal, he pulled me aside and embraced me. "That's the Maya we've been praying for. That's the woman who's going to survive this." "I'm not just going to survive it," I said quietly. "I'm going to make sure they answer for what they did." He nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then do it with your head held high." From the church, Angela and I drove straight to the federal building downtown. Agent Williams was waiting for us in the same conference room where he'd shown me the timeline of my destruction. Spread across the table between us were 347 pages of evidence. Every forged document, every bank transfer, every email and text message that proved conspiracy. The timeline printed and bound, witness statements from the notary's supervisor, analysis from forensic accountants showing exactly how much had been stolen and where it had gone. "This is everything," Angela said, sliding the stack of folders across to Agent Williams. "This is 18 months of premeditated fraud." He flipped through the pages, his expression growing darker with each document. "Mrs. Jackson, this is one of the most thorough evidence packages I've seen from a civilian. But I need you to understand this is going to take time. Federal investigations don't move quickly. I'm looking at 2 to 3 months minimum before we can execute warrants. 3 more months of living this lie. 3 more months of sleeping next to a man who'd systematically planned my financial ruin. 3 more months of pretending I didn't know that my best friend had conspired to destroy me." I looked at Agent Williams and spoke with a calmness I didn't entirely feel. "I can wait. I've been patient for 18 months while they stole from me and my son. What's a few more months if it means they face real consequences?" My phone buzzed in my purse, then again and again. I pulled it out and saw Darius's name lighting up the screen. 23 missed calls, a string of texts, each one more desperate than the last. "Where are you? We need to talk." "Maya, answer your phone." "Don't do something you'll regret." That last one almost made me laugh. Don't do something I'll regret. As if I was the one who should be worried about regret. As if I was the one who'd spent a year and a half plotting against someone I claimed to love. I silenced the phone and set it face down on the table. Angela watched me, a slight smile on her lips. "What are you thinking?" "I'm thinking he knows something's wrong. He's panicking." "Good." I looked at Agent Williams. "How long until the warrants are ready?" "June at the earliest. Early July more likely. 3 months, 90 days. I could do 90 more days of this performance if it meant watching them face federal agents, if it meant seeing justice actually served." I stood up, shouldering my purse, and looked at both of them. "Then we wait. We build the case until it's perfect. Until there's no chance they walk away from this." Angela stood with me. "And in the meantime, I keep singing. I keep working. I keep being the woman they thought they could erase." My phone buzzed again with another call from Darius. I rejected it without looking. Let him sweat. Let him wonder what I know and what I'm planning. Let him feel just a fraction of the fear I've felt. I turned to Agent Williams. "When you're ready to move, you call me. Day or night. I want to be there when you arrest them." He nodded. "You'll be the first call I make." As Angela and I walked out of the federal building into the late afternoon sun, she asked me the question I'd been asking myself for weeks. "Are you okay? Really?" I thought about my voice soaring in the choir room, about the evidence stacked and ready, about justice waiting just a few months away. "I will be," I said. "We'll be ready when they come. Let him sweat." The call came on a Tuesday evening in early June, 3 months and 4 days after I'd walked out of the federal building with Angela. I was making spaghetti for Jaden when my phone rang, Agent Williams's name appearing on the screen. My hand trembled as I answered. "Mrs. Jackson, the warrants have been approved. We move tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. I wanted to give you advance notice like I promised." I set down the wooden spoon gripping the counter to steady myself. All three simultaneous raids, your husband's office, Ms. Green's salon, and Lisa Green's residence. We'll have teams at each location." That night I barely slept. I lay in bed next to Darius for what I knew would be the last time, listening to him breathe, watching the ceiling fan spin shadows across the room. At 4 a.m, I gave up trying to rest and went downstairs, made coffee, and waited for Angela to pick me up. I'd told Darius I had an early meeting with a client. He'd barely looked up from his phone when I'd said it. Angela arrived at 5:15 and we drove through the empty pre-dawn streets to a location 2 blocks from Tasha's salon. Agent Williams had told us where to park, far enough away to be safe, but close enough to see. As we sat there in the darkness, Angela reached over and squeezed my hand. "However you feel when this happens, it's okay. There's no right way to watch your life explode." At exactly 6 a.m., 3 black SUVs pulled up in front of Lux Beauty Salon. Federal agents in tactical gear emerged, their movements precise and coordinated. I watched them surround the building, watched the lead agent pound on the door. Through the salon's front window, I could see a light come on in the back room, where I knew Tasha had a small apartment. She'd lived above her business for the past year, ever since her renovation that my stolen money had funded. The door opened, and Tasha appeared in a robe, her hair wrapped in a silk scarf. Confusion on her face that quickly turned to terror as agents pushed past her into the salon. Within minutes, they were carrying out boxes of documents, computers, filing cabinets. Tasha stood on the sidewalk now, an agent on either side of her, and even from this distance I could see her mouth moving, could imagine the denials pouring out. Then they put the handcuffs on her. My phone buzzed with a text from Agent Williams. "Target 2 secured. Your husband in custody at his office now." I closed my eyes and let that sink in. Darius, who'd kissed me goodbye 1,000 mornings, who'd held my hand at our wedding, who'd been in the delivery room when Jaden was born. Darius in handcuffs. Darius facing federal agents who knew every detail of what he'd done. By 6:30, neighbors had started emerging from their homes. People I'd known my whole life standing on porches and sidewalks watching federal agents swarm Tasha's salon. Someone must have called the news, because 2 vans with satellite dishes pulled up, reporters scrambling out with cameras and microphones. And then I saw the church sisters, Sister Margaret and 3 others from the choir, hurrying down the street toward the scene. They'd heard somehow, and they'd come. Tasha was screaming now, her voice carrying across the morning air. "This is a mistake! I didn't do anything! This is crazy!" Agent Williams emerged from the salon, walked up to her calmly, and I could read his lips even from this distance. "Ma'am, we have evidence of 47 fraudulent transactions tied to your accounts. You have the right to remain silent." But Tasha didn't remain silent. She fought against the handcuffs, still yelling, still insisting this was all some terrible misunderstanding. The church sisters spotted me in Angela's car and came over immediately, surrounding the vehicle like a protective wall. Sister Margaret leaned into my window. "Baby girl, we're here. Whatever you need." "I just need to see this through," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. Another text from Agent Williams. "Target 1 being transported to field office now." I looked up just as a second FBI van pulled onto the street, and through its windows I could see Darius in the back seat, his hands cuffed behind him, his face the color of ash. The van slowed as it passed Tasha's salon, and that's when Darius saw me. Our eyes locked across the distance, across everything that had been broken between us, and I watched recognition and panic flood his face. He turned in his seat, craning his neck to keep me in view, as the van continued past, and I saw his lips form a single word. "Please. Please, what? Please forgive him. Please lie for him. Please pretend I didn't know he'd spent 18 months systematically destroying me. Please let him get away with it, because once upon a time we'd loved each other." I turned away, breaking eye contact, breaking whatever last thread had connected us. Angela started the car and began pulling away from the curb, the church sisters stepping back to let us pass. Behind us, I could hear the reporter's voice sharp and clear in the morning air as she spoke into her microphone. "We're here at Lux Beauty Salon in Atlanta's South Side, where federal agents have just made 3 arrests in what authorities are calling an alleged $180,000 fraud scheme targeting a local social worker. The accused include the victim's husband, her best friend, and a family member who allegedly helped facilitate identity theft. More details as this story develops. $180,000. The number hung in the air, bigger than I'd even realized, bigger than just the loan and the transfers. They'd taken everything, and now the whole community would know exactly what they'd done. I spent the rest of that day fielding calls from people I hadn't spoken to in years, all of them suddenly concerned, suddenly wanting to know if I was okay. The news had spread through the community like wildfire, and my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. By evening, I'd turned it off completely. Jaden was at his grandmother's house. Darius's mother, Sharon, who'd called me crying that afternoon, begging to keep him overnight so he wouldn't have to see whatever was coming next. I'd agreed. He didn't need to witness any more of this. Angela called around 9 to tell me that Darius had posted bail. $100,000 borrowed from Sharon, who'd apparently taken out a second mortgage on her house. The judge had set conditions: no contact with me, no contact with Tasha, surrender of passport, GPS monitoring, ankle bracelet. He was to go directly to his mother's house and stay there pending trial. "He won't come to the house," Angela assured me. "He'd be insane to violate a federal protective order." But at 11 p.m., as I sat in the kitchen going through paperwork Angela had prepared, I heard a car pull into the driveway, then footsteps on the porch, then pounding on the door, urgent and desperate. Maya, please, I know you're in there. We need to talk." Darius's voice, ragged and pleading, cut through the quiet house. My heart hammered as I grabbed my phone and called Angela. "He's here," I said quietly. "Do not open that door. I'm calling the police right now." "Wait," I said, surprising myself. "Not yet. I want to hear what he has to say." "Maya, this is a violation of his bail conditions. He could go back to jail tonight." "I know," I said, "but I want to hear him first. I want to look him in the eye." I hung up despite Angela's protests and walked to the front door. Through the peephole, I could see Darius pacing on the porch, his hands shaking, his face desperate. I unlocked the door and opened it slowly. He looked terrible. His eyes were bloodshot, his clothes rumpled, and the ankle monitor was visible above his work boot. When he saw me, relief flooded his face. "Maya, thank God. Please, we need to talk. This is all a misunderstanding. I can explain everything." "Come in," I said, my voice eerily calm. I stepped aside, and he practically stumbled through the doorway. In the kitchen, I poured 2 cups of coffee from the pot I'd made earlier, my movements slow and deliberate. I set 1 cup in front of him and sat down across the table, the same table where we'd eaten family dinners for 10 years. "Sugar or truth?" I asked. He blinked, confused. "What?" "In your coffee. Do you want sugar or do you want truth, because you can't have both anymore?" I pulled out my phone and connected it to the Bluetooth speaker on the counter. Then I played the recording I'd made through Tasha's window all those months ago. His voice filled the kitchen, intimate and cruel. "She's got no fire left, Tash. You're the real thing." Darius's face went white. I stopped the recording and spread bank statements across the table between us, the ones showing every transfer, every theft, every lie documented in black and white. "Maya, listen to me." He started, his voice cracking. "Tasha manipulated me. She got in my head, made me think you didn't love me anymore, that you were planning to leave me anyway. She said you'd already talked to a lawyer, that you were just waiting for the right time. I was weak, I was stupid, but she orchestrated all of this." I almost laughed. "That's interesting, because Tasha told the FBI that you initiated everything. She has text messages proving you approached her with the plan first. So which one of you is lying, or are you both just trying to save yourselves?" He opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish drowning in air. "I don't know what she told them, but I'm telling you the truth. We can fix this. We can tell them it was all a mistake." "A mistake," I repeated slowly. 18 months of planning was a mistake. Forging my signature was a mistake. Stealing $180,000 was a mistake. "I never meant to hurt you. I just needed the money for the business, and things got out of hand, and then I couldn't stop because—" The doorbell rang. Darius's head snapped toward the sound, fear flooding his eyes. "Who is that?" I stood up and walked to the door. Angela stood there with 2 police officers, exactly as I'd texted her to arrange, while Darius had been talking. I opened the door wide. "Mrs. Jackson," one of the officers said, nodding at me, then looking past me to Darius. "Sir, you're in violation of a federal protective order. You need to come with us." Darius shot to his feet, panic replacing whatever hope he'd brought with him. "Maya, no, please don't do this. We can work this out." The officers moved into the kitchen, their hands near their belts, their expressions professional and unmoved. I reached into the folder on the counter and pulled out the divorce papers Angela had prepared, sliding them across the table toward Darius. "Sign these," I said quietly. "Or when this goes to trial, I testify that you were the mastermind, that you manipulated Tasha, that every bit of this was your idea. The FBI is very interested in hearing my perspective on who planned what. Maya, you can't. I can. And I will. Unless you sign those papers right now and give me full custody of Jaden, the house, and every asset we have left." His hand trembled as he reached for the pen I offered. The officers waited patient as he scrawled his signature across 3 pages, his handwriting barely legible. When he finished, I took the papers and handed them to Angela, who'd been standing in the doorway witnessing everything. Then the officers moved in, turning Darius around, pulling his hands behind his back. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was the most final sound I'd ever heard. "Maya, please," he yelled as they walked him toward the door. "You're destroying our family, everything we built. How can you do this?" I followed them to the threshold, stood in the doorway as they led him down the porch steps toward their patrol car. The night air was cool on my face, and somewhere down the street a dog was barking. Normal sounds in a night that felt anything but normal. I looked at him one last time. This man, I'd loved this man who'd vowed to cherish me. This man who'd spent 18 months hunting me like prey. "You destroyed it 18 months ago," I said. "I'm just making sure everyone knows the truth." The morning after Darius's bail was revoked, I sat in my living room with coffee going cold in my hands when someone knocked on the door. Through the window, I saw Mrs. Eleanor Green Tasha's mother standing on my porch in her church clothes, even though it was a Thursday. She'd been an elder at Mercy Gospel for 20 years, had taught Sunday school when I was a child, had always seemed like one of the pillars of our community. Now she looked smaller, somehow diminished by shame. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. "Maya," she said, her voice breaking on my name. "Please, I need to talk to you. About what, Mrs. Eleanor? About Mercy, about forgiveness, about my daughter." Tears streamed down her weathered face. "She made a terrible mistake, I know that. But she's my only daughter, my only child. I'm begging you, is there any way you could talk to the prosecutors? Tell them it wasn't as bad as they're making it sound." I stood there looking at this woman who'd once wiped my tears when I'd fallen off the monkey bars at the church picnic, who'd brought my grandmother casseroles when she got sick, who'd been part of the fabric of my childhood. And I felt something harden in my chest. "Mrs. Eleanor, I didn't destroy Tasha. She destroyed herself. She chose to conspire against me for 18 months. She chose to help steal from my family. She chose to sleep with my husband while pretending to be my friend." My voice stayed level calm. "I just stopped funding it. But the prosecutors are saying she could get years in prison. Years, Maya. She'll lose everything. She already took everything from me. My marriage, my trust, my money, my sense of reality. I'm just making sure there are consequences." I stepped back, beginning to close the door. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Eleanor. I truly am, but I can't help you." She left weeping, her shoulders shaking as she walked back to her car, and I felt a pang of guilt that I forced myself to swallow. Compassion was important, but so was justice. That afternoon, Sharon called, Darius's mother, who I hadn't spoken to since she'd picked up Jaden the day of the arrests. Her voice was thick with emotion when I answered. "Maya, honey, can we meet, just you and me? There's something I need to tell you. Something I should have told you a long time ago." We met at a coffee shop in Virginia Highland, far from our neighborhood where everyone knew everyone's business. Sharon looked like she'd aged 10 years in the past week. Her hands shook as she wrapped them around her coffee cup, and when she finally looked up at me, I saw guilt eating her alive. Baby, I need to tell you something, and I need you to hear me all the way through before you say anything. I nodded, waiting. Darius did this before. 12 years ago, before you met him, he was married to a woman named Keisha. She was a school principal, had her own money, owned her own home, smart woman, successful. Sharon's voice cracked. He drained her savings account, $45,000 over the course of a year, forged her signature on credit cards, financial abuse, they called it, when she found out she was going to press charges. The coffee shop noise faded into background static. I stared at Sharon, unable to process what I was hearing. I paid her $30,000 to keep quiet. Sharon continued, tears streaming down her face now. I begged her not to press charges. I told her Darius would get help, that he'd go to therapy, that he'd never do it again. She took the money and left Georgia, and I convinced myself he'd learned his lesson, that he'd changed, that when he met you, it would be different. You knew, I whispered. You knew he'd done this before, and you let me marry him anyway. I thought he'd changed. He seemed different with you, more stable, more mature. I thought love had fixed him. Her voice broke completely. Maya, I am so sorry. I chose my son over protecting you, and that was wrong. That was cowardly. The betrayal cut deeper than I expected. Another person who could have warned me, who could have saved me years of pain, who chose silence instead. You could have warned me, I said, my voice hollow. You could have saved me from all of this. I know, and I'll regret that for the rest of my life. Sharon reached across the table, her hand trembling. But let me save you now. Let me make this right. I'll give a statement to the FBI about what he did to Keisha. I'll testify that this is a pattern, that he targets successful women, that this isn't just a mistake but a predatory behavior. I'll help them establish repeat offender status. I looked at this woman who'd baked birthday cakes for Jaden, who'd welcomed me into her family, who'd kept a secret that could have changed everything. Part of me wanted to refuse to tell her it was too late. But the practical part, the part that wanted justice more than revenge, knew that her testimony could be the difference between Darius serving 2 years or 7. Okay, I said finally. Contact Agent Williams. Tell him everything. She nodded, relief flooding her face, even as tears continued to fall. Thank you. And Maya, for what it's worth, you were always too good for him. I see that now. I left the coffee shop and drove home as the sun set over Atlanta, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. I fed Jaden dinner, helped him with homework, tucked him into bed, performing motherhood like I had every night through this nightmare. Around 10 p.m., as I was finally allowing myself to think about sleep, my phone rang. Detective Morrison, the local police officer who'd been coordinating with the FBI. Mrs. Jackson, we have a problem. Darius's ankle monitor went offline 4 hours ago. We went to his mother's house and he's gone. Cleared out the bank account she'd set up for his living expenses, about $15,000. We found a receipt for a Greyhound bus ticket. My blood went cold. Where? Texas. We think he's heading for the Mexican border. We've got APB out, Border Patrol has been notified, but I wanted you to know, we're going to find him. I stood in my dark kitchen phone pressed to my ear and felt something like vindication settle over me. He'd run. He'd proven exactly what kind of man he was, exactly how guilty he knew himself to be. Thank you for telling me, I said. Let me know when you find him. We will. And Mrs. Jackson, he's only making this worse for himself. Within 2 hours, Agent Williams called back with an update. They'd tracked Darius's phone to a Greyhound bus station in Houston. He'd withdrawn $15,000 in cash from Sharon's account before the ankle monitor went dead, and security footage showed him purchasing a one-way ticket to Laredo, Texas, a border town where crossing into Mexico was as easy as walking across a bridge if you knew the right people. We've coordinated with Houston PD, Agent Williams said. His bus arrives at the station at 7 a.m. tomorrow. We'll have officers waiting. Mrs. Jackson, this is highly unusual, but given everything you've been through, if you want to be there when we take him into custody, I can arrange it. I didn't hesitate. I'll be on the next flight. Angela insisted on coming with me. We booked tickets on a red-eye that left Atlanta at midnight, and by 6:30 the next morning we were sitting in an unmarked police car across the street from the Greyhound station in downtown Houston. The city was already awake, traffic building heat rising even in the early hours. Detective Rodriguez from Houston PD sat in the driver's seat sipping coffee and watching the station entrance through binoculars. "Bus from San Antonio pulls in at 7:02, he said. "Your husband's on it. We've got plainclothes officers inside and 2 patrol units around the corner. When he steps off that bus, we take him." I watched the station through the tinted windows, my heart beating steady and strong. Angela sat beside me, her hand resting on my knee, an anchor keeping me grounded. Part of me couldn't believe I was here, hundreds of miles from home, waiting to watch my husband get arrested for trying to flee the country. But another part of me, the part that had been forged in the fire of the past months, knew this was exactly where I needed to be. At 7:05, the bus pulled into the bay. Passengers began disembarking, tired travelers with backpacks and rolling suitcases. People going about their ordinary lives with no idea they were about to witness something extraordinary. Then I saw him. Darius stepped off the bus, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, wearing a baseball cap pulled low and sunglasses even though the sun was barely up. He looked around nervously, scanning the crowd, his body language screaming guilt. "That's him," I said quietly. Detective Rodriguez spoke into his radio. "Target identified. Moving in." I watched as plainclothes officers positioned themselves at the exits, while uniformed police emerged from strategic positions around the station. Darius must have sensed something wrong because he suddenly stopped walking, his head swiveling, looking for escape routes. That's when he turned and his eyes landed directly on our car. Even through the tinted windows, even across the distance, he recognized me. I saw the moment of realization hit him, saw his face go pale. He tried to run. He made it maybe 10 feet before 2 officers tackled him to the pavement, his duffel bag skidding across the concrete, spilling clothes and cash across the sidewalk. Other passengers screamed and scattered. Darius struggled against the officers, yelling something I couldn't hear from inside the car, but it didn't matter. They had him. It was over. Detective Rodriguez got out and coordinated with his team, while Angela and I stayed in the vehicle watching as they lifted Darius to his feet and cuffed his hands behind his back. His baseball cap had fallen off, and his sunglasses were broken on the ground. He looked smaller, somehow diminished, nothing like the confident contractor who used to kiss me goodbye in the mornings. They walked him toward a patrol car parked directly next to ours. As they passed my window, one of the officers glanced at me and slowed just slightly, giving me a moment. Darius's head turned and our eyes met through the glass. "Maya!" he screamed, his voice breaking. "Maya, I still love you. Please, you have to help me. I'm still your husband. Please." I reached for the window control and rolled it down slowly. The morning air rushed in, hot and heavy with humidity. Darius's face was streaked with tears and dirt from the pavement, his eyes wild with desperation. I looked at him for a long moment, this man who'd vowed to love and cherish me, who'd promised to be my partner through better or worse, who'd chosen worse and made me live it. "Love isn't what you do when it's easy, Darius," I said, my voice calm and clear. "Love is what you don't do when it's wrong. And you did everything wrong. Maya, please. We can fix this. Don't let them take me." "You took yourself," I said. "The moment you decided to hunt me instead of love me, you did this to yourself." The officer started moving him toward the patrol car again, but Darius twisted against their grip, still trying to reach me, still trying to find some crack in my resolve. "You'll never forget me," he screamed as they opened the car door. "You hear me? You'll never forget what we had." They pushed him into the back seat and slammed the door, cutting off his voice. Through the patrol car window, I could see him still yelling, still pleading, still refusing to accept that this was the end he'd written for himself. I rolled up my window and turned to Angela. "Watch me," I whispered. After Houston, the waiting began. Federal cases move with the speed of glaciers. Angela warned me, and she was right. The months stretched out long and slow, filled with legal procedures that seemed designed to test patience. There were depositions where I sat across from defense attorneys and answered the same questions 5 different ways. There were document reviews where Angela and I went through thousands of pages of evidence, making sure every detail was perfect. There were plea deal negotiations that both Darius and Tasha rejected, each convinced they could beat the charges if they just told their version of events convincingly enough. In the meantime, I filed for divorce. That process moved faster than the criminal case, and 8 months after Darius's arrest in Houston, a judge signed papers that legally ended our 10-year marriage. I got the house full custody of Jaden and a restraining order that would last until he was released from wherever he ended up serving time. Darius's bail had been permanently revoked after his flight attempt, so he sat in federal detention in Atlanta, waiting for trial while I rebuilt the life he'd tried to destroy. I went back to work at the community center, counseling families through crisis, while living through the aftermath of my own. My colleagues were supportive in that careful way people are when they don't know what to say, offering sympathy with their eyes while trying not to bring it up unless I did first. But the work itself was healing. Helping other people find their way through darkness reminded me that I was finding my own way too. Jaden adjusted better than I'd feared. Kids are resilient in ways adults forget. He asked questions at first, wanting to know why Daddy was in jail, why we couldn't visit him, why everything had changed so suddenly. I told him age-appropriate truths. Daddy made bad choices. Daddy hurt people. Daddy has to face consequences. Sometimes people we love disappoint us, but that doesn't mean we stop being strong. On Sundays, I sang in the choir. Every week without fail, my voice rising with the others in hymns that spoke of redemption and grace and strength through suffering. The church community embraced me, not with pity, but with respect. They'd seen me broken and watched me refuse to stay that way. Sister Margaret gave me more solos, and I sang them with a power I'd never had before, my voice carrying the weight of everything I'd survived. In October, a reporter from the local news station contacted me. They wanted to do a story about financial abuse in marriages, about how it often goes unnoticed until it's too late. I hesitated at first, uncomfortable with the attention, but Angela convinced me that speaking publicly might help other women recognize the signs earlier than I had. The segment aired on a Tuesday evening, and by Wednesday morning, 3 women's shelters had called, asking if I'd be willing to speak to their residents. I started small talking to groups of 10 or 15 women who'd left abusive situations and were trying to rebuild. I told them my story without embellishment, without making myself into a hero. My story isn't special, I'd say, but if it helps even one of you see the signs earlier, recognize the patterns before they destroy you completely, then it's worth telling. The months passed. Fall turned to winter. Jaden turned 12. I celebrated my 37th birthday surrounded by church sisters and work friends, no husband for the first time in over a decade. The house felt different without Darius in it, emptier, but somehow more mine. I repainted the bedroom, changed the locks, planted a garden in the backyard that I'd always wanted, but he'd said would be too much maintenance. Then in January, 18 months after that morning, I'd driven to Tasha's house and seen a truck that didn't belong. Angela called with the news I'd been waiting for. Trial date is set, February 3rd. Both defendants are pleading not guilty. Their attorneys are claiming you fabricated evidence out of jealousy, that you're a scorned woman trying to destroy them both. I was folding laundry when she called Jaden's school clothes warm, from the dryer the ordinary task of an ordinary evening. I set down the shirt I was holding and walked to the window looking out at the neighborhood where I'd lived my entire adult life. Let them claim whatever they want, I said, my voice steady. The truth isn't jealous. It just is. Their strategy is going to be attacking your credibility, making you seem unstable, vindictive. They're going to try to make the jury believe you're lying about everything. Then we'll let the evidence speak, the forged signatures, the bank transfers, the emails, the 18-month timeline. Facts don't care about their stories. Angela was quiet for a moment, then asked the question I knew was coming. Maya, are you ready to face them, to sit in a courtroom and watch them try to destroy you all over again? I thought about that morning through Tasha's window, about discovering the stolen money at 2 a.m., about watching federal agents surround the salon, about Darius screaming in Houston that I'd never forget him, about every moment between then and now, every small step toward reclaiming myself. "I've been ready since the day I looked through that window," I said. The federal courthouse in downtown Atlanta was imposing all marble and security checkpoints and the weight of justice hanging in the air. On February 3rd, I walked through those doors with Angela beside me, my head held high wearing a navy suit that made me look professional and unshakable. The courtroom was packed with people I knew and people I'd never seen before, reporters and curious onlookers and church members who'd come to support me. When they called my name to take the stand, I walked up calmly, placed my hand on the Bible, and swore to tell the truth. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Lisa Chen, led me through my testimony with questions that built the story piece by piece. I told them about the discovery about the window, about the bank statements and the forged signature. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stated facts in a clear, steady voice that carried to every corner of that courtroom. Darius's defense attorney, a man in an expensive suit who specialized in making victims look like villains, tried his best to rattle me during cross-examination. He suggested I was a scorned woman fabricating evidence out of jealousy. He implied I'd always been controlling with money, that Darius had every right to access their joint accounts. He insinuated that the affair was my fault because I'd neglected my marriage for my career. I looked him directly in the eyes and said, "I didn't fabricate 18 months of emails. I didn't forge my own signature. I didn't steal from myself. The evidence speaks for itself." The prosecution spent 3 days building their case. They brought in a forensic accountant who walked the jury through every stolen dollar, every fraudulent transfer, every piece of the financial puzzle that proved premeditation and conspiracy. They showed the timeline on a massive display board, color-coded and detailed, demonstrating that this wasn't impulse or passion, but calculated theft spanning a year and a half. They called Sharon to the stand, and Darius's mother testified with tears streaming down her face about his first victim, about the pattern of targeting successful women, about her own complicity in covering it up. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. The prosecution called Tasha Green to testify. She'd taken a plea deal at the last minute, agreeing to testify against Darius in exchange for a reduced sentence. She walked to the stand in an orange jumpsuit, her hair no longer styled perfectly, her face bare of makeup, looking nothing like the confident woman who'd owned a thriving salon. She told the jury that Darius had masterminded everything, that he'd manipulated her into participating, that she'd been in love with him, and hadn't realized the extent of the fraud until it was too late. But when the prosecutor showed her own text messages suggesting they drained me completely, her story fell apart. The jury watched her try to rewrite history in real time, and I could see on their faces that they weren't buying it. She'd been just as guilty, just as calculating, and her attempt to save herself by blaming him only proved they were both liars to the core. Darius's attorney made his closing argument about desperation, about a man trying to save his failing business, about family hardship and mistakes made under pressure. It fell flat. You don't accidentally forge someone's signature. You don't mistakenly plan an 18-month conspiracy. The jury saw through every word. After 4 hours of deliberation, they returned with their verdict. The courtroom went silent as the jury foreman stood and read the counts. Guilty on wire fraud, guilty on identity theft, guilty on conspiracy to commit fraud, guilty on all counts for both Darius Jackson and Tasha Green. Lisa Green, the notary, had already pled guilty and was awaiting sentencing. The judge delivered sentences 2 days later. Darius Jackson, 7 years in federal prison plus full restitution of $180,000. Tasha Green, 4 years in federal prison, her salon to be seized and liquidated to help cover the restitution owed. Lisa Green, 2 years in federal prison and permanent revocation of her notary license. I sat in that courtroom and watched the words land like hammer strikes. 7 years, 4 years, 2 years. Numbers that represented accountability, consequences, justice, finally served. Darius stared straight ahead, his face blank, refusing to look at me. But Tasha turned as the marshals approached to take her into custody, and her eyes found mine across the courtroom. "I was jealous," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "I was jealous of everything you had. Your marriage, your success, your grant, your life. I wanted it all." I stood up slowly, holding her gaze, and spoke words I'd been saving for this exact moment. "You didn't want my life, Tasha. You wanted to destroy it. There's a difference." The marshals led her away, and she was crying now, finally showing something real. Darius followed in handcuffs. His shoulders slumped, the confident contractor who'd once kissed me goodbye, now just another convict heading to federal prison. 1 year after the trial, I stood in the community center where I'd worked for over a decade and cut the ribbon on something I never imagined I'd create. The Grace Rebuild Fund, a nonprofit dedicated to helping women recover from financial abuse in marriages and relationships. Angela had partnered with me, offering her law firm's services pro bono to any woman who came through our doors needing legal help to reclaim stolen assets or escape abusive situations. We'd secured grants, built a board of directors, and hired 2 staff members who'd lived through their own versions of what I'd survived. In our first year, we helped 47 women. 47 stories of forged signatures and drained accounts and partners who'd systematically stolen their futures. Together, we'd recovered $890,000 in stolen funds, helped dozens escape situations that would have destroyed them, and built a network of support that reminded these women they weren't alone. At the launch event, Jaden stood at a microphone in front of 100 people and performed a spoken word piece he'd written himself. My son, now 13 and taller than me, spoke about watching his mother break and then rebuild, about learning that strength isn't never falling down, but always getting back up. His voice cracked with adolescence and emotion as he ended with the line, "My mama taught me that grace isn't weakness. Grace is knowing you deserve better and having the courage to demand it." I cried, then, the good kind of tears, the kind that come from pride so fierce it can't be contained. 2 weeks after the launch, I received a letter forwarded from the federal prison in Jessup, Georgia. Darius's handwriting on the envelope made my hands shake as I opened it, expecting anger or manipulation or desperate pleas for forgiveness. Instead, I found something I didn't expect: honesty. "Maya," it read, "I heard about your fund from my mother. She told me you're helping women like Keisha, like you women I targeted and destroyed. I'm glad something good came from the wreckage I created. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. But I want you to know that I was broken long before I broke you. My father stole from my mother for years before she finally left him, and I watched it destroy her. I swore I'd never be like him, and then I became exactly like him. I hope you teach Jaden better than my father taught me. I hope he learns that real strength is in honesty and that real love protects instead of praise. You deserved better than me. You always did." I read the letter 3 times, then folded it carefully and put it in a drawer. I didn't respond. Some things don't require a response. Healing isn't about forgetting what happened or absolving people of their sins. It's about choosing to move forward to build something beautiful from the ruins they left behind. Mrs. Eleanor came to volunteer at the fund 2 months after we opened. Tasha's mother showed up on a Tuesday afternoon asking if there was anything she could do to help, any way she could atone for raising a daughter who'd hurt so many people. I gave her the job of coordinating our donation drives, collecting professional clothes and household items for women starting over. She worked quietly, efficiently, never asking for recognition or forgiveness. Sharon became one of our most valuable volunteers, speaking to groups about the warning signs she'd ignored in her son, mentoring young women about recognizing red flags in relationships before they became catastrophes. She and Mrs. Eleanor often worked side by side, 2 mothers bound by the shame of children who'd chosen wrong, trying to make something right out of their failures. I didn't forgive them for their silence, not in the way they wanted. But I made space for them to do better now, to be part of the solution instead of remaining part of the problem. "You can't undo the past," I told them both one afternoon as we packed boxes for a woman fleeing a 10-year marriage that had drained her savings. "But you can do better now. You can help make sure other mothers and daughters know the truth before it's too late." The fund grew. We expanded to offer financial literacy classes, teaching women how to protect their assets and recognize economic abuse. We partnered with therapists who specialized in trauma recovery. We built a network of employers willing to hire women starting over with gaps in their resumes and damaged credit scores. Every woman who walked through our doors carried her own version of betrayal, and every woman who left carried tools to rebuild. On a Sunday morning in late spring, I woke up early and dressed carefully in white, the color of new beginnings. I'd written something new, a song that Sister Margaret had agreed to let me debut at the 11 o'clock service. The sheet music sat on my passenger seat as I drove to Mercy Gospel, the notes and words representing everything I'd learned about breaking and rebuilding, about grace and justice, living side by side. I walked into the choir room where rehearsal was just ending, and Sister Margaret looked up from her piano, a smile spreading across her face. "Ready?" she asked. I thought about everything that had brought me to this moment: the window, the trial, the prison sentences, the fund, the women I'd helped, and the son I was raising to be better, the life I'd rebuilt from ashes. "Ready," I said. The church was packed that Sunday, every pew filled with faces I'd known my whole life, and some I'd only met through the fund. Sister Margaret introduced the new song with words about resilience and rebirth, about voices that refuse to be silenced. Then she nodded at me, and I stepped forward to the microphone. I'd called it "The Window and the Mirror," and I'd written every word during late nights at my kitchen table, pouring everything I'd learned into music and lyrics that told the truth about breaking and becoming. When the piano started and I opened my mouth to sing, my voice came out pure and strong, no cracks, no hesitation, just power that had been earned through fire. Through the window I saw the lie, in the mirror I found my truth. They tried to steal my song, but I'm singing louder than before. The words soared through that sanctuary, filling every corner with sound that was both pain and triumph. The choir joined me on the chorus, their voices lifting mine higher, and I felt something release in my chest, some last piece of grief I'd been carrying finally set free. When I reached the bridge, I closed my eyes and sang directly from my soul. They wrote me small, they wrote me weak, they wrote me as forgotten. But I'm rewriting every line, and this story's mine, and I'm just getting started. My voice held the final note until the church erupted, people on their feet crying and clapping and shouting amens. I opened my eyes and found Jaden in the front row, tears streaming down his face, mouthing words I could read perfectly. "That's my mama." 6 months later, I published a memoir. Angela had connected me with a literary agent who'd heard my story on the news, and within a year I'd written 240 pages that told everything. I called it "The Window and the Mirror: How I Found Myself After They Tried to Erase Me." The dedication page took me longest to write, wanting to get the words exactly right. To Jaden, may you always know your worth and never settle for love that diminishes you. To the women still finding their voice, your song matters, and the world needs to hear it. To my grandmother, who taught me that when they break you, you build again stronger, you were right about everything. The book launched at a small independent bookstore in downtown Atlanta and became a regional bestseller within 3 months. Women drove hours to attend readings, staying afterward to share their own stories of financial abuse, of betrayal by people they trusted, of rebuilding from ruins. Every signing turned into an impromptu support group, and I found myself giving the same advice over and over: document everything, trust your instincts, know that you deserve better. At a signing in Athens on a rainy Tuesday evening, a woman waited until everyone else had left before approaching my table. She was in her early 40s, well-dressed, with the kind of careful makeup that women wear when they're trying to hide evidence of crying. She leaned close and whispered, "My husband and my sister, they're doing exactly what happened to you. I found bank statements, hotel receipts, text messages. I've been sitting in my car for an hour trying to decide if I should come in here." I set down my pen and took her trembling hand in mine, feeling the weight of her fear and confusion and rage all mixed together into something I recognized intimately. "Not anymore, they're not," I said firmly. "Sit down. Let me tell you exactly what we're going to do." We sat in that empty bookstore for 2 hours while I walked her through every step: how to document evidence without alerting them, how to secure her finances, how to contact the right authorities, how to protect her children from the fallout. I gave her Angela's card and the number for the Grace Rebuild Fund. I told her about forensic accountants and federal fraud statutes and the power of simply refusing to be silent anymore. When she finally left, her shoulders were straighter, her eyes clearer, her fear transformed into purpose. I watched her walk to her car through the rain and thought about all the women I'd helped, all the voices I'd encouraged to speak, all the lives that had been salvaged because I'd chosen to turn my pain into something useful. Driving home that night, I thought about everything that had brought me here, the discovery through the window that shattered my world, the investigation that revealed the depth of their conspiracy, the trial that delivered justice, the fund that transformed my story into salvation for others, the song that reclaimed my voice, the book that made sure the truth would outlive the lies. I thought about revenge and how I'd believed it would save me, how I'd imagined it would feel when they finally faced consequences. And yes, watching them led away in handcuffs had felt good. Hearing guilty verdicts had brought satisfaction. But what actually saved me wasn't their punishment. What saved me was remembering who I was before they tried to rewrite me. The woman who sang in church and helped her community and believed in love and justice. The mother raising a son to be better than his father. The survivor who chose to build instead of staying broken. And now I was writing a new story, one where I wasn't defined by what they took, but by what they could never destroy. My voice, my strength, my capacity to transform pain into purpose and help other women do the same. The window had shown me the lie, but the mirror had shown me the truth. And the truth was this: I was stronger than anything they'd done to me, and I was just getting started. And that's Maya's story. From the moment she saw that truck in her best friend's driveway to the day she published a book that would help thousands of women find their own strength. This is what it looks like when someone refuses to stay broken. Maya didn't just survive betrayal, she transformed it into purpose. She took the worst thing that ever happened to her and built something beautiful from the wreckage. I want you to think about something for a moment. How many Mayas are out there right now looking through windows at truths they don't want to see? How many women are discovering bank statements that don't add up, finding receipts that tell stories their partners deny, sensing something wrong, but convincing themselves they're being paranoid? Maya's story matters because it reminds us that trusting your instincts isn't paranoia. Documenting evidence isn't vindictive. Demanding justice isn't revenge. It's simply refusing to let people destroy you and get away with it. What struck me most about this story is how calculated it all was. 18 months of planning, forged signatures, a whole network of people conspiring together. This wasn't a moment of weakness or a mistake made in passion. This was predatory behavior disguised as love, and that's what makes it so chilling. But it's also what makes Maya's response so powerful. She didn't just react emotionally, she built a case. She gathered evidence. She let the system work. And in the end, justice wasn't just served, it was documented so thoroughly that they couldn't lie their way out of what they'd done. Now, I want to hear from you, because your perspective matters to this conversation. What would you have done in Maya's position? Would you have confronted them immediately? Or would you have done what Maya did and built your case in silence? Do you think 7 years was enough time for Darius, or should the sentence have been longer? And here's the question I'm most curious about. Do you think Maya should have warned Darius's future partners after he's released, or is it enough that his criminal record will follow him forever? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'm genuinely curious how you would handle this situation. If this story resonated with you, if Maya's journey from that window to that final song moved something in you, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. Every week, I bring you true stories about people who faced impossible situations and found the strength to fight back. These aren't fairy tales. They're real accounts of ordinary people doing extraordinary things when life backs them into corners. Your subscription tells me these stories matter to you, and it helps this channel reach more people who need to hear them. Share this video with someone who needs to hear Maya's message, someone who's questioning their own situation, someone who needs permission to trust their instincts and demand better. Sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is simply tell the truth and let it set us free. Thank you for listening to Maya's story. Thank you for being part of this community. And remember, if you're living through your own version of this nightmare right now, document everything, trust yourself, and know that you deserve better. The window shows you the lie, but the mirror shows you the truth. And the truth is that you're stronger than anything they can do to you. I'll see you in the next story.